Hello team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prab, and today we're going to discuss about internal audit interview question session 4. Thank for the amazing response you have shared on the internal audit and that motivate me to make more videos on this particular topic. My name is Prab Nair. For more information, you can check my LinkedIn profile. And if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to the YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss the future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting a time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. So nowadays what happen is, the interviewer doesn't talk about a particular topic in the interview jobs. So they basically want to validate your experience, they want to validate your knowledge, they want to validate your work. So that is why I thought I will make the first interview question is, can you tell us about your experience in internal auditing? So you can start by giving this kind of a response, as an auditor, experience in the internal audit can be varied depending on their roles, the organization they work, and the industry they operate. Okay. So when you start with this kind of a statement, they get the idea, okay, he know about audit. He know things works, how it works. Okay. And further to that, you can basically narrate some stories. Example, like you can tell them, okay, as per my experience, which I'm involved in audit is I do planning and executions of the audit, because auditor in the internal audit plan and execute the audit of the various functions and process within the organization. And I'm involved in identifying the key risks, developing audit programs, gather evidence, assessing the adequacy and effectiveness of controls, schedule the meeting with the stakeholders. So one of the core experience I have in planning audits. So when there should be a confidence in your voice that give the visibility. I do a lot of compliance with regulations, assessment and all that as an auditor. Okay, we assess a lot of laws and regulations that affect the organization operations, which include monitoring changes in the regulatory requirement. I used to identify area of non-compliance, making recommendations to address the gap. So that is how you can basically address. I have a leadership quality. So I used to collaborate with a lot of stakeholders. As you know, as an auditor, it is difficult for us to convince the auditees on their action plan. So as an auditor, as a leader, I do a lot of collaborations. So here I used to collaborate with stakeholders within the organization, including a management, process owners, and other control functions such as compliance and risk management. And they may also work with the external auditors and regulations as a part of the audit process. One of my major experience in the internal audit is communicating the audit finding. As you know, one of the difficult tasks is basically communicate the audit findings. So auditor in the internal audit communicate the findings and recommendation to management on the stakeholders. So I do a lot of writing audit reports. My audit report should have a business perspective. My audit report should have a client perspective. My audit report has an auditing perspective. So it will be in a very layman language. I try to explain. I try to narrate the stories. I used to present the finding to management. I used to do a lot of tracking of progress and remediation activities. Along with that, I do continuous improvements. I also play a critical role in driving the continuous improvement within the organization, which including implementing the best practices, sharing the best knowledge functions, feedback and all that. So you can say like that as an overall auditor experience in the internal audit, it is a rewarding and challenging, but I play a critical role in helping the organization to achieve their strategic objectives while managing a risk and maintain the compliance. When you give such kind of a statement, definitely it is a turning point of your job. Okay. So that kind of an experience you need to carry when you speak in the interview jobs. Okay. So let's move to the next interview question. So question is, what methodology and tool you have used in conducting internal audit? And here the interviewer want to know your experience on the tools, experience on the process. Don't worry, I have an answer for that. Okay. And still you have not subscribed to the channel, do subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon, because I come up with a lot of videos like that. Okay. So I will make sure, you won't get disappointed after watching this video. So how the experiences basically carry here. So, you can basically start with your experience, or if you don't have, you can check this video. So as I said, we have a different type of methodology. One of the methodology, we have a risk-based auditing, which focus on identifying, assessing risk across a different area of organization and prioritize audit activity based on a level of risk. So you can say like that in this way, that I do a lot of risk assessment based audits. Example, like I'm doing an audit of the data center where I'm trying to identify risk in the data center. I'm not checking whether data center compliance within a regulation. No, I'm just assessing a data center more from a generic point of view. Do they have a proper documentations? Do they have appropriate separation duties? Do they follow the log management system? So that is how my audit is more about finding a risk instead of just finding a generic gap. So that is one methodology I used to follow. Sometimes we have a compliance-based auditing where we need to assess the organization's compliance with legal, regulatory, and internal policy requirement. Let's take an example. In one of my audit, I have to ensure that, okay, the organization should be comply with RBI. So I pick the requirement of RBI and then I basically compliance against the RBI requirement. So that is called as a compliance-based auditing. The third one is called as a process-based auditing, where we focus on assessing the efficiencies and effectiveness of the organization business process. Example, like I obtain the change management process. In the change management process, it is clearly mentioned that every change need to be closed in 2 days. Okay, I verify by checking the RFC, is the change closed in 2 days? And that is how I'm seeing the effectiveness. The change need to be reviewed by 3 parties, but in the sample, I can see change only reviewed by 1 party. So that is how I'm assessing the effectiveness of the process. Okay, but along with that, I use a lot of tools. Okay, I use a lot of tools while doing an audit. Example like audit management software. It is a software which helps the auditor to manage their audit process, including planning, scheduling, and everything, because audit itself is a project. Second is I'm using data analysis softwares by which I can able to analyze large amount of data quickly and efficiently, which allow me to identify the potential risk or anomalies. I do a lot of surveys and tools by which I gather information from employees. This is something I used during a time of initial information gathering. And sometimes I use a flow charts, which helps me to visualize the business process, allowing them to identify, the area of improvements and evaluate the effectiveness of the existing controls. So these are the techniques and processes I used by which I can able to conduct the audit. And if you going to answer such kind of way, I'm sure, it brings a lot of confidence in the interviewer mind. Okay. So let's move to the next question. The question is, how do you stay up to date with the changes in the regulation and industry best practices? Now here, the interviewer want to know how much you update with the new things, how much you are proactive in terms of upgrade, knowledge awareness and all that. So you can start this kind of a script is staying, up to date with the changes in regulation, industry best practice is critical for the internal auditor and to provide also the effective and relevant documentation to the organization. So I follow a lot of practice, like I refer industry publication because I'm a member of ISACA, IC Square and other membership body, which basically send me newsletters, which talk about the latest trend, best practice and regulatory changes in their field. Recently, we have a lot of amendment from RBI on their digital banking, a lot of amendment happening in the IoT, OT security. So I used to keep upgrade my knowledge through those publications. I joined a lot of professional memberships. I joined professional associations. Okay. So I'm part of the networking opportunities, providing training, getting trainings. Okay. Like ISACA members or IC Square membership I have, where I get some visibility about the new trends. I do a lot of training upgrades on my stuff by Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, InfoSec and all that. Then by forming a network, part of a community, getting more informations, I attend the conferences, seminars and other events. And most important thing, I'm also part of a regulation bodies where I used to monitor websites of the regulation bodies, and from there I get the information. So overall, staying up to date with the changes in regulation is a best practice and essential for the internal auditor, and it also provides the value to their organization to ensure they're conducting audits, they are relevant, effective and compliant with the applicable regulation standard. So, okay, let's move to the next question. How do you assess the effectiveness of the organizational internal control? See, internal control. So here what happened is he want to know how you do the audit. Again, I'm telling you, they're not talking about a particular concept. They're just asking you, how do you assess the effectiveness of the organization internal controls? So internal controls are the procedure designed to ensure the organization operations are running effectively and efficiently, and to prevent the detect errors, fraud and other risk. Okay. So one example of internal control is separation duty. It was basically introduced to make sure one person will not do end-to-end duty. We have a policy in place to introduce, because the purpose of introducing a policy to improve the behavior of the people. That is another example of the internal control. But the question here they're talking about is, how do you assess the effectiveness of the organization internal control? So I don't know about others, but I'll do first walkthrough and documentation, because I used to evaluate the design and implementation of internal control by conducting a lot of walkthrough of the business process. I do review a lot of documentation such as policy, procedure, flowchart. By that, I get a high level visibility what is happening before doing an actual interview of the people. Example, like in my recent audit, I did the audit of the incident management systems, where I first collect the incident management policy, documentations and everything. Because before going to block someone's time, before taking someone's time to ask their question, you need to first prepare your questions. So for that, you need to quickly walk through the process, documentations and all that. Then once you have a walkthrough of the documentations and everything, you interview the people, you do the control testing, where I will test the effectiveness of a specific control by performing a test like data analysis, observations, substantive testing, compliance testings, validate against the procedures what they mention. If the incident management saying that incident need to be closed in 3 days, I will check if the incident is closed in 3 days. Incident need to be reported with this value, I'm going to check that. So that is called as a control testing. I do risk assessment. So sometimes we evaluate the organization risk management process to determine if they are identifying, assessing risk appropriately and implementing adequate control to mitigate this risk, because that is also part of a control. I do perform compliance testing, where I test the organization compliance with the legal regulatory requirements, because we cannot only consider from a process-based audit. Sometimes we use again some external benchmark. Okay, we use some kind of external industry standards, and according to that, we try to validate the gaps and everything. So these are the activities we have, which I use to perform, by which I will validate the effectiveness of the control. Again, it is completely depending upon the business requirement. Might be in your company, compliance testing is a great, risk assessment is a great, but not in every company. So you will be more happy with the benchmarking, not everyone. So, but make sure if you're going for the benchmarking, compliance testing, risk assessment, control testing, before that, you must do the walkthrough and documentation review. Okay, thank you. Okay, Prab, can you just tell me about how do you communicate audit findings and recommendation to stakeholder? Very, very important question, and every interviewer want to know this, because your entire work is depending upon how you present the findings. Okay, you've done your audit for 1 month, but you failed to convince the auditee on their findings. So that is why every interviewer focus on this particular question. So how do you communicate audit findings and recommendation to stakeholder? So effective communication. So you can start with the script is like effective communication of audit finding and recommendation is critical. Okay, to ensure the stakeholder understand the issues identified and you can take appropriate action to address them. A good auditor is the one who can be a good teacher, who can narrate the story, and good auditor is the one who keep evidences. When you challenge someone's process that you're inadequate, you must have evidence. So that is why before we present any audit findings, so here, this is I'm sharing my experience. Okay. So you can do the same thing. Okay. So it's a great thing, but I do a lot of mock drills. I sit with my peer and I just feel like, okay, I'm an auditor. You are an auditee. I present my findings. I check what is the counter questions comes. And according to that, I will narrate the story and prepare the evidences. So if you ask me, I will prepare the written report. So your report, when you're talking about, should be summarize the audit findings, recommendations, including your supporting evidence or data. And the report should also in such a manner that is easy to understand, and it should have a clear heading. That is the first important thing required. Never use technical jargons, because if you're going to use technical jargons, you can't convey them. So it may confuse the auditee. So use simple, easy to understand language that is accessible to all the stakeholders. Explain the context and background of the audit. You have done the audit, you have prepared the report, but they have no idea about what is the context of this audit. This audit is a process-based audit. This audit is a compliance-based audit. So it's very important to explain the context. So when I do audit and when I prepare the report, I was very clear about my context. So that basically give the idea. So I explain the context and background of the audit, including the objective, the scope of audit. And it basically helps the stakeholder to understand the context in which the findings and recommendations were made. Then I offer the practical actionable recommendation. See, I am an auditor, I can recommend, but I cannot help them to implementation. But my recommendation should be realistic. Okay. First of all, auditing is not a revenue generation for the company. And your recommendation is basically increasing a budget. So your recommendation should be so simple, okay, which is easy to implement. Avoid making a personal judgment. I see a lot of auditors does this, and because of that, they got rejected also. So make sure whatever the language you are using, okay, whatever the opinion you have regarding an audit, be clear with that, because that's the most important thing we need to consider. Okay, so avoid making a personal judgment opinion, like stick to the facts, present the finding recommendation based on your evidence collected, not shows your personal, enemies and agreement and all that. And most important is basically after presenting auditing, do the follow-up. Okay, so overall effective communication of audit finding recommendation is critical to ensure stakeholder understand the issues and identify, take an appropriate action to address them. Along with that, there's a one question which is asked in an interview. I've seen a lot of trend recently happen on this is what are the common challenge as an auditor you have experience? So when they ask me, I give them a reply that, okay, the limited resource sometime, okay, like shortage of budget, technologies, then sometime auditees may be resistant to the audit process, particularly if they feel that auditor is questioning the expert judgment. So this make the difficult for the auditor to get the evidence. Then lack of cooperations. Sometimes we encounter a lack of cooperation from auditees. Complexity of the systems, fail to understand. Sometimes inadequate documentations are there. Conflict priorities. So overall, internal auditor must be able to manage this challenge effectively to ensure the audit process remain objective, through and effective. So effective communication is very important to overcome any challenge. Do let me know how do you find this practical aspect of internal audit interview questions, and do let me know shall I make more videos on a similar topic. If you still not subscribed to the channel, click on the bell icon to make sure you should subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification to make sure you should not miss my future videos. And most important, share this video maximum to the people who get the benefit from this video. Thank you. Goodbye. Your Prab Nair.